February 28, 1942, Camp Elliott, San Diego, California. The pencil hovered above the paper as Major James Jones watched something that went against every rule of military cryptography he had ever learned. 4 Navajo men stood in front of him, sending battlefield messages in just 20 seconds. Messages that would normally take encryption machines 30 minutes to encode. The words coming through the radio made no sense to him. They sounded like nothing he had ever heard before. Yet these 4 men, recruited only a few days earlier from Los Angeles, decoded each message perfectly, instantly, without making a single mistake. Major Jones had spent 20 years in military communications. He knew codes. He knew ciphers. He knew that breaking enemy communications could win wars. And he knew the Japanese had already shown they could crack every American code system being used. The Marines were losing the Code War before they even started fighting in the Pacific. But what he saw that morning would change everything. 420 Navajo Marines would later create the only unbreakable code in modern military history. A code so perfect that Japan's top intelligence officer would later admit they never even came close to breaking it. This story starts not in 1942, but 24 years earlier in October 1918. 8 Choctaw soldiers serving with the American Expeditionary Force in France were put on telephones during the Meuse-Argonne offensive. They spoke to each other in their native language. The Germans, who had been listening to American phone lines and reading every message, suddenly went quiet. They could hear the messages, but they could not understand a single syllable. The Choctaw language belonged to the Muskogee language family, found only in North America. No German code expert had ever heard it before. These 8 Choctaw Code Talkers gave American forces a very important advantage in the last months of World War I. But military leaders forgot this lesson. The program ended with the war. The achievement was written down and mostly forgotten until December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor showed a frightening truth about American military communications. The Japanese were reading American codes almost as fast as Americans could send them. Japanese intelligence had been getting ready for this war for many years. Their codebreakers had already cracked the Gray Code, the Brown Code, and many other military systems. By early 1942, the problem had become very serious. The Japanese could listen to American radio messages and break the codes in just a few hours, sometimes in minutes. Even worse, they were using their English skills to cause chaos in American communications, sending fake orders to set up traps and ambushes. Major Howard Connor, who would later lead the Code Talkers at Iwo Jima, explained the problem clearly. Every code we used, the Japanese broke. Every cipher, every encryption system, every mechanical machine. They had brilliant code experts and unlimited time to work on our messages. We needed something completely new, something they had never seen before, could never get ready for, and could never break even if they stole our machines. The American encryption systems we had were not just weak, they were painfully slow. The M94 cipher machine took 30 minutes to encode a 3-line message, and another 30 minutes to decode it on the receiving side. In the fast-moving battles of the Pacific, this delay could be deadly. Then came Philip Johnston. He was born in 1892 in Topeka, Kansas. Johnston was not Navajo. His parents were missionaries who moved to the Navajo reservation in Arizona when he was 4 years old. He grew up with the Navajo people, learning their language and their culture. By age 9, Johnston could speak Navajo well enough to serve as an interpreter for a Navajo group sent to Washington to ask for tribal rights. By his teenage years, he was one of maybe 30 non-Navajo people in the world who could speak the language at all. Johnston served in World War I, then went back to Los Angeles and worked as an engineer for the city water department. By December 1941, Philip Johnston was 49 years old, well settled in his life and career, far away from his childhood on the reservation. Then, in February 1942, He read a newspaper article about Army training exercises where Native American soldiers had sent messages in their tribal languages. Johnston understood something that very few people in America could understand. The Navajo language was not just hard, it was almost impossible for outsiders to learn. Navajo belongs to the Athabascan language family. It has no alphabet. There was no written form until American missionaries made one in the 1920s. The language depends a lot on tones, where the same sound can mean different things depending on pitch and stress. Its sentence structure does not look like English, Japanese, German, or any European or Asian language. Johnston knew that in the 1920s and 1930s, Germany and Japan had sent students to study Native American tribes. They had learned Cherokee, Choctaw, and Comanche, but they had never studied Navajo. The reservation was too far away. The language was too hard. The day after reading the newspaper article, Johnston went to the Naval Office in Los Angeles. He told them his idea. Use Navajo speakers as radio operators. Let them send messages in their native language. The Japanese would never break it because they had no starting point, no reference, no way to understand the language. Johnston only had 2 weeks to organize a demonstration. He found 4 Navajo volunteers in Los Angeles. On February 27, 1942, Johnston and his volunteers traveled to Camp Elliott. February 28, 1942, 0900 hours. Major Jones and Major General Clayton Vogel gathered in a communications room. They had invited some doubtful staff officers. Everyone thought this demonstration would fail. Johnston put 2 of his Navajo volunteers in one room, 2 in another room 50 yards away. He connected them with a field telephone. Then he gave the first pair a written message in English. Enemy expected to make tank and dive bomber attack at dawn. The first Navajo man read the message, picked up the field telephone, and spoke in Navajo. 20 seconds later, the receiving Navajo man wrote down the message in English. Enemy tank dive bomber expected to attack this morning. It was almost exactly the same, word for word. The machine translation would have taken 30 minutes and needed code books that could be captured. Major Vogel immediately wrote a letter to the Commandant of the Marine Corps. He recommended recruiting 200 Navajo men right away. The letter was dated March 6, 1942. The Corps approved a pilot program with 30 Navajo recruits. If it worked, they would expand the program. On May 4, 1942, 29 Navajo men got on a bus at Fort Defiance, Arizona. They were taken to Fort Wingate, New Mexico, and then sent to the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego. These 29 would become known as the Original 29. They went through 7 weeks of regular Marine Corps boot camp. On June 27, 1942, Platoon 382 graduated. They were sent right away to Camp Elliott for special training. Their mission was completely new and had never been done before. They had to make a military code using their own language. The challenge was very hard. Military communications needed hundreds of special terms: tank, submarine, artillery, battalion. The Navajo language had no words for these modern military things. The solution was smart and creative. The Code Talkers made 2 types of code. Type 1 was an alphabet system. They gave Navajo words for each letter of the English alphabet. But instead of just 1 word per letter, they made many words for each letter to stop frequency analysis. The letter A could be represented by Wulachi, which means ant, or Basana, which means apple, or Sethanil, which means axe. This stopped Japanese codebreakers from using statistics to break the code. Type 2 was direct word substitution for common military words. Submarine became Bashlo, which means iron fish. Battleship became Latso, which means whale. Fighter plane became Dahi-Tihi, which means hummingbird. Bomber became Jutso, which means buzzard. The Code Talkers organized ships and aircraft by their special characteristics and features. Ships were called fish because they moved through water. Aircraft were called birds because they flew. This system made sense to Navajo speakers, but would be completely confusing to outsiders. The original code had 211 terms. Within a few months, it grew to 411 military words. This final dictionary, combined with the Type 1 alphabet system, made a code that was very deep and flexible. Every term had to be memorized during training. Nothing was written down while in the field. By August 1942, the original 29 had finished their training. They had made a fully working military code using the Navajo language. They could encode, send, and decode messages at speeds that amazed their instructors. The Code Talkers started going to combat units in late 1942. The first group went to the 1st Marine Division fighting. Marines who had never heard Navajo sometimes thought the Code Talkers were Japanese spies. The guttural sounds, the strange tones, and the fast speech patterns sounded nothing like English. Several Code Talkers said they were even held at gunpoint by fellow Marines who thought they were enemy soldiers. The solution was to give each Code Talker a bodyguard who would protect them from both enemy attacks and friendly fire. The Japanese reaction to the Navajo messages showed just how strong the code was. Japanese radio operators recorded every message. They sent the recordings to code-breaking units to study. The results confused them completely. Japanese intelligence had already broken almost every American military code. They had thousands of skilled code experts. They had unlimited time and resources. Yet the Navajo messages made no sense at all. They tried frequency analysis, the normal way to break substitution codes, but the many substitutes for each letter stopped this method from working. They tried comparing messages to find repeated phrases, but the Navajo Code Talkers changed their messages on purpose. Japanese intelligence tried language analysis. They brought in every language expert they could find. None of them recognized the sounds. The language was completely new to them and unlike anything they had heard. The Japanese code name for the Navajo messages showed their frustration. They called it the incomprehensible language. One report said the sounds seemed almost not human, like the American forces had made some kind of mechanical talking machine. By late 1942, Japanese commanders were getting warnings from their intelligence teams. The Americans were using some kind of unbreakable code for battlefield messages. All attempts to break it had failed. At Tarawa, in November 1943, Code Talkers sent and received over 800 messages during the 76-hour battle. Not one single mistake happened. Japanese forces intercepted many of these messages, but learned nothing useful from them. At Peleliu, in September 1944, Code Talkers coordinated the entire amphibious attack. They handled all communications between ships, aircraft, and ground forces for 73 days under some of the worst conditions in the Pacific War. But the real test came at Iwo Jima, February 19, 1945. It was the largest amphibious attack in the Pacific War. 6 Navajo Code Talkers worked non-stop during the first 48 hours of the battle. They sent over 800 messages in just 2 days. Every message was sent in Navajo. Every message was decoded immediately. Every message was completely correct. Major Howard Connor said it clearly in his report after the battle. Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. The Japanese never stopped trying to break the code. Even as their empire fell apart, their code experts kept working on the Navajo messages. They put lots of resources into the problem. One event showed both Japanese determination and how strong the code was. A Navajo soldier named Joe Kieyoomia was captured at Bataan in April 1942. Kieyoomia was Navajo and spoke the language fluently, but he was not a code talker. He had never been trained in the code. Japanese intelligence officers took Kieyoomia to a communications room. They played recordings of Navajo Code Talker messages. They told him to translate them. Kieyoomia listened carefully. He heard Navajo words he knew, but the messages made no sense. He heard words like wachi, which means ant. He heard beslo, which means iron fish. But when the words were put together, they made no clear message. What Kieyoomia did not know was that these were code words. Walachi was the letter A. Beslo meant submarine. Without training in the code, even a fluent Navajo speaker could not decode the messages. He told his captors the truth. The words were Navajo, but the message was gibberish. The Japanese did not believe him. They tortured him. They stripped him naked and made him stand in deep snow until his feet froze to the ground. This event showed how brilliant the code was. Even a fluent Navajo speaker who was not trained could not break it. After the war, Lieutenant General Kao Arisu, Japan's chief of intelligence, confirmed what many people had already suspected. Japanese code experts had broken many American codes during the war, but they never broke the Marine Corps code. They never even came close. By the end of the war, about 400 Navajo men had served as code talkers. 13 of them were killed in action. They served in all 6 Marine divisions. Their contribution was enormous and could not be measured, but when they came home in 1945 and 1946, there were no parades, no public celebrations. They were told to keep absolute secrecy about their service. The Code Talker program stayed classified. The military kept the code secret until 1968. Keeping the code secret for 23 years had big effects. The Code Talkers could not talk about their work. They could not share their experiences with anyone outside the Code Talker community. Even when the program was declassified in 1968, public recognition came very slowly. The Code Talkers themselves rarely spoke about what they had done. Many of them suffered from what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder, but over time recognition grew. In 1982, President Ronald Reagan declared August 14th as National Navajo Code Talkers Day. In 2001, President George W. Bush gave gold medals to the 4 surviving members of the original 29. President Bush's words showed the importance of their achievement. He said, "It is a story all Americans can celebrate, and every American should know. It is the story of ancient people called to serve in a modern war. It is the story of the only unbreakable spoken code of World War II. Most of all, it is the story of young Navajos who brought honor to their nation and victory to their country." The Navajo Code Talkers faced a harsh irony. Many of them had gone to government boarding schools where they were punished for speaking Navajo. American education policies tried to erase Native American languages and cultures. Yet in World War II, America needed these languages. The Code Talkers were asked to use the language they had once been punished for speaking. They served anyway. This showed a deep patriotism that went beyond the unfair treatment they had suffered in the past. When they came home after the war, many had a hard time getting veterans' benefits. The reservation systems did not support the GI Bill programs that helped white veterans after the war. Yet their work changed American military communications forever. The success of the Navajo Code Talkers showed that language-based security could be just as strong as technological security. Their story became a strong symbol of Native American patriotism. Even after centuries of broken treaties, forced moves, and discrimination, Native Americans have served in every American war at rates higher than any other group. The last of the original 29 Code Talkers, Chester Nez, died on June 4, 2014, at the age of 93. The impact of the Code Talkers is hard to measure, but it was extremely important. Tens of thousands of messages were sent with 0 mistakes over 3 years of fighting. Communication speeds went from 30 minutes to just 20 seconds. They had perfect security against an enemy that had already broken almost every other American code.
At Iwo Jima alone, the 6 code talkers working the first 48 hours sent information that directly helped thousands of Marines survive. The code talkers' work showed something very important about human intelligence and cultural knowledge. The most advanced code machines of the time could not match the security given by human language and memory. The code talkers' legacy goes beyond World War II. They changed how America sees its indigenous people. They showed that Native American languages and cultures were strengths, not weaknesses. Today, fewer than 200,000 people speak Navajo. The language faces challenges, but the code talker story has inspired efforts to save and teach Navajo. The code talkers turned their language from something seen as a weakness into one of America's most valuable military tools. They proved that indigenous knowledge is powerful. They showed that diversity makes national defense stronger, not weaker. The Navajo Code Talkers left Japanese code breakers completely confused. They gave American forces a huge advantage. They saved many lives. They helped win the war. And they did all this by speaking the language of their people, the language that stayed unbreakable when their nation needed it most.